How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're sending Daf Yomi Chullin, Daf 114 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 114. Great Daf. We are going weiter in basar vechalav. We're going to learn about Chelev and Chalav. If you cook Chelev in milk, what are the nafkaminas in terms of your chiyuv, iser halal iser, different cheshbonis over there. That's the first sugya of today's daf. Chelev bechalav. The second, and then the rest of the daf, we're not actually going to get the whole daf. It's Erev Shabbos, and it's always a race against the clock. Anyways, but for the rest of, as far as we're going to get, but anyways, I think what we're going to get, where we're going to end, I think is kind of, is a little bit of a segue into new sugya, but that continues on to the next daf. Anyways, for the rest of the daf that we're going to do together, it's going to be about scoping out basar vechalav. So, cows and sheep, and does it apply to what if you cook an animal in its own milk, or get into that kind of details, a little bit of nitty gritty. It's going to be a lot of kal v'chomer, a lot of comparing, a lot of contrasting, tzad shavas. Honestly, it's going to be almost kind of like yevamos of sorts. It's interesting. It's going to be almost like a mothers and children, and it almost becomes like a sort of like abstract kind of yevamos between animals and the different things that they produce, and all sorts of things. I would have, I think, normally made a few charts and made a few slides just so that we can look at things together. There's like stuff to visualize, Yevamos style, but alas, it's a race against the clock here on Erev Shabbos, Parshas Kiseitze. Anyways, friends, come join me. Let's have a great time studying Daf Daf 114 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Itmar, it was stated, Amavashal Chelev b'chalav. One who cooks Chelev in Chalav. And then you can add the word vechalav and eats it. So if you cook Chelev in Chalav and you eat it. Now we had learned yesterday that Chelev is included in the Isser of basar vechalav. So now the question is, so Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi, Chad Omar Loke v'Chad Omar Eino Loke. One says that you would get makis, and the other one says you would not get makis. Okay, let's go on. Let's say that the machlokes between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi is the following: the man Omar Loke kasaver Isser chal al Isser, man Omar Eino Loke kasaver ein Isser chal al Isser. Okay, so what's going on? So what are we talking about? So we're talking about a person who cooks Chelev in milk, Chelev in Chalav, and that's essentially basar b'chalav. The thing is, Chelev is its own Isser. We talk all about. We've talked many times about eating Chelev in the chiyuv kares. Now the thing is that the Isser of Chelev is limited to eating it. You're not allowed to eat Chelev. You're allowed to cook Chelev. There isn't anything against cooking it, but you're not allowed to eat it. So now here we have a person who cooked Chelev in Chalav, so that's an issue of basar b'chalav, and then he ate it. And when he ate it, he was warned. He says, hey, if you eat that Chelev, you're going to get makis. Why are you going to get makis? For basar b'chalav. They warn him, if you eat that Chelev, you're going to get makis for basar b'chalav. So the shaila is, would he in fact get makis for basar b'chalav? Because if you say ein iser chalal iser, there was a pre-existing iser against eating chelev. Even before you cooked the chelev in the chalav, you were already not allowed to eat it because it's chelev. So when you now cook the chelev in the milk, so the question is, will you now additionally be chayav for basar b'chalav? Would you stack the Isser of basar b'chalav on top of the pre-existing Isser of Chelev? So if you say Isser Chalal Isser, yes, you could stack on basar b'chalav, and if you warn him, hey, if you eat that, you can get makis for basar b'chalav, so he'll get makis for basar b'chalav. But if you say Ein Isser Chalal Isser, well, there was already an Isser of Chelev, we can't stack on the Isser of basar b'chalav on top of that, and warning him that you're going to get makis for basar b'chalav is irrelevant because he's not going to be chayiv for eating basar b'chalav. Cooking basar b'chalav, on the other hand, is a different story. There's nothing wrong with cooking chelev, which means that there was no isser against cooking chelev. So when you cook chelev in chalav, chelev in milk, then he's definitely violating in isser basar vechalav by cooking chelev, because there was no pre-existing issue with cooking chelev. So now let's start again from the beginning. Itmar was stated, Hamavashal chelev b'chalav v'achalo. A person who cooks chelev in chalav, chelev in milk, and then he eats it, and he's warned, hey, if you eat that chelev b'chalav, you're going to get makis. So one opinion is he does get makis. The other opinion is he doesn't get makis. Lema, let's say, the machlokas is the following. According to the opinion who says that he gets makis, he holds that an isser can be stacked onto a pre-existing isser. Eating basar vechalav could be stacked onto the isser of eating chelev, and if he's warned that he's going to get makis for eating basar vechalav, he'll get makis for eating basar vechalav. And according to opinion who says that he won't get makis for eating basar v'chalav, holds that the isser of eating basar v'chalav cannot be stacked onto the isser against eating chelev, and being warned for basar v'chalav is irrelevant. He will not be chayiv makis. Lo d'chuli alma in isser chalal isser. The Gemara says no. Everyone agrees ein isser chalal isser. And therefore, if he's warned, hey, you're going to be chayiv makis for eating basar v'chalav, no, he won't. Ein isser chalal isser. You're not going to be chayiv makis for eating chelev b'chalav, since you were already, there was a pre-existing isser on that chelev, which was just simply eating chelev. And therefore everyone agrees that if what he was warned about was the eating, don't eat the chelev b'chalav because you're going to be chayiv makis, forget about it. Of course not. Ein isser chalal isser. The lo laki is not going to get makis. Ki pligi, the machlekes is a bishul. Very interesting. And chapash lukati, and we're going to explain what this means. The question is, if he was warned about bishul, if he was cooking chelev b'chalav, and they say, hey, wait, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to cook chelev b'chalav, and he did it anyways. So it should seem obvious that he should be chayiv makis, right? There's no pre-existing isser. There's nothing wrong with cooking chelev. The issue is cooking chelev b'chalav, which is what he was doing, and that's what he was warned about. So of course he should be chayiv makis, right? So let's see. Manda Omer Loke Chari Suru. According to Manda Omer, who says that he gets makis for cooking chelev b'chalav, of course he does. It's only there's no pre-existing isser. Umanda Omar Eino Locus. What would be the rationale for the opinion that says that you don't get makis? I'll tell you why. When it comes to Losvashal Gediba Chalavimo, as we've discussed, it says in the Torah 3 times, of course. Losvashal Gediba Chalavimo 3 times. And each time it says the same thing. Losvashal Gediba Chalavimo. One time it means, in one instance, it's teaching us don't cook it. Losvashal Gediba Chalavimo. But in the other 2 instances, one of them is teaching don't get benefit from it. The other one is teaching don't eat it. So when it says, Lo sivashel gediba chalevimo, don't cook meat and milk, in one of the instances, don't cook means don't eat. Why is it referring to eating as cooking? To compare eating to cooking. To teach us that when it comes to, that the same criteria that would apply to eating, apply to the cooking of basar b'chalav. So let's read inside. When the Torah talks about don't eat meat and milk that were cooked together, it refers to it as don't cook it. It's to compare eating and cooking. And therefore, when it comes to chelev, cooking chelev b'chalav, you won't be chayiv makis for cooking chelev b'chalav, because we compare cooking to eating, and just like you would not be chayiv makis for eating chelev b'chalav, since it ain't isser chalal isser, there was a pre-existing isser of against eating chelev. So kevan the al achila lolaki, since he wouldn't get makis for eating chelev b'chalav, abishul nami lolaki, you also wouldn't get makis for even cooking chelev vechalav, even though there's no other iser other than cooking it, still you would not be chayev makis. So that is the machlokes between Rav Ami and Rav Asi with regard to chelev vechalav, whether or not you'd be chayev makis for cooking chelev vechalav. Vikadamer, those who say that the machlokes is the following: abishul kulamelo plige delaki. No, when it comes to cooking chelev vechalav, of course you chayev makis. Of course you chayev makis. Cooking chelev b'chalav, of course you chayev makis. Ki pligi, where there argues achila, is in fact with regard to eating chelev b'chalav. Now, of course, we had said everyone agrees ein iser chal al iser. So, if that's the case, how do we explain the opinion who says that you do get makis for eating chelev b'chalav? So man omer eino loke to ein iser chal al iser. So it's easy to understand the opinion who says that you don't get makis for eating chelev b'chalav. That is because ein iser chal al iser. There's already a pre-existing iser of eating chelev. You're not going to be chayev for eating chelev b'chalav. However, uman omer loke, according to the opinion who says that you do get makis, even though ein iser chal al iser, it's similar to the limud that we learned a few minutes ago. This is why the Torah refers to eating basar b'chalav in the same way as it refers to cooking. But it refers to eating basar b'chalav as cooking basar b'chalav. Don't cook meat and milk. In the instances, it means don't eat it. Kevin de abishul lucky. It's to teach us that just like you would be chayev makis for bishul, so you also can be chayev makis even for eating it, even though we say ein iser chal al iser. However, the Torah teaches us specifically by referring to achila as bishul to say that just like bishul you'd be chayev makis, for achila you'd also be chayev makis. Achila nami laki v'baisema, and for a third and final explanation, mar machada or mar machada v'lo plige. Alternatively, you could say Rav Ami and Rav Asi actually agree. They're just talking about two different things. The Manda Omer who says that you're chayiv makis is talking about bishul. The Manda Omer says you're not chayiv makis is talking about achila. Azoy. Chapash Lukati. We're going to go weiter. Givaldi. Meizvei, we have, however, a contradiction. What is the contradiction? From the following brisa. The contradiction comes at the end of the brisa. The brisa begins, interesting. A person who cooks meat in whey. Whey is, and maybe our chaver of Jonathan Shapiro can give us some more info on cheese making. But whey, I believe, is when you make cheese and it make curds and cheese curds and stuff. Like the curds get separated from the whey. We know that the liquid that's left. That's left over after the curds have been removed. So if one were to cook meat in whey, in that, potter. He's potter for basar vechalav. He's not chayiv for cooking basar vechalav. Dam shebishul vechalav potter. Also, as we learned yesterday, so blood has nothing to do with basar vechalav. If you cook blood in chalav, there's no iser. Bones, sinews, horns, hooves, shebishlam b'chalav that were cooked in milk, potter. Also potter. And here is the part that's relevant for us. Pigul. We know all about pigul. Masechta Zvachim, Masechta Menachos. We've kind of had a few months now in Masechta Chullin already. Can you imagine? Almost 4 months already in Masechta Chullin. Can you imagine? Almost 4 months in Masechta Chullin already. We haven't really talked about pigul, ve'anosar, ve'atome. So, pigul, of course, right? It's meat, korbanos that you thought about chutz lizmano. You're not allowed to eat it. Chiyuv kares. Nosar also any korban meat that was left out after its allotted time that it's allowed to be eaten. Tame, if it became tame. In all these cases, you're already not allowed to eat it. Shabishlam b'chalav. If you now take pigul, nosar, tame, which are already aser, and cook it in milk, so now it's basar b'chalav, chayev. We say that you're chayev. Now, one second, based on the logic that we were saying about chelev b'chalav, we were saying you would be potter for eating it. And yet, And yet, we are saying here that you would be chayav for it. Hi Tana Sover Isser Chalal Isser. Well, the Tana of this brisa, who says he would be chayav for basar vechalav when it comes to pigul noser and tameh, is because the Tana of this brisa holds Isser Chal al Isser, that basar vechalav would be stacked onto pigul noser and tameh. However, we've been going up until now according to the opinion who says Ein Isser Chal Isser, that Isser, one Isser is not stacked onto a pre-existing Isser. B'mechalav potter. Hamvashal b'mechalav potter. We had said earlier in the brisa that if one cooks meat in whey potter, he's not chai for basar b'chalav. Mesayel le Rish Lakish. This supports Rish Lakish's opinion that Tnan, that we learn in the Mishnah Masechta Machshirin. Now, in Masechta Machshirin, Perek Vav Mishnah Dalid, Masechta Machshirin Perek Vav Mishnah Dalid. I think I mentioned in the past, I learned from my grandfather's Mishnayos. It's the biggest chus in the world. I learned from my grandfather's set of Kati Mishnayos probably almost every day. My grandfather, he has like different random things that are marked. He's got a paper clip. I can't tell you why. I can understand why, but I can't tell you exactly why. My grandfather has a paper clip on Machshirin Perek Vav Mishnah Dal. It's a very important Mishnah, but out of all Shas Mishnayos, he's got a paper clip on this Mishnah. Maybe he's got one other paper clip in Shas Mishnayos. I can't remember. But on this Mishnah, I do remember. That's an important Mishnah. It's the Mishnah of Yad Shoch Adam. It's the Mishnah that lists the 7 liquids that are machshir ochlin lekabel tumah. Again, out of all Shas Mishnayos, there are a lot of important Mishnayos and Shas Mishnayos. This one he put a paper clip on. Perek Vav Mishnah Daled, the 7 liquids that are machshir ochlin lekabel tumah. Of course, my grandfather was part of Babble on Talmud, the very early days. He passed away in Masechta Pesachim, the middle of Masechta Pesachim. So early on, Seder Moed, long time ago already. Chaper Shlukati. Now the very next Mishnah, after, right, so Perek Vav Mishnah Hey, after all of the 7 liquids that are machshir, ochlin, and kabel tumah were already listed, the next Mishnah, which we're going to discuss, goes into tolados. So just like water, for example, it can be machshir the kabel tumah. So we talk about different types of waters that would be included as well. So when it comes to milk, says the Mishnah Masechta Machshirin, mei chalav arein kechalav, that whey, in terms of being machshir ochlin kabel tumah, whey is considered like milk. V'amochel harei hu kishemen, and any liquids that emerge from olives, we will treat as olive oil, which is also one of the 7 liquids. Rish Lakish, and says that when we say that whey is considered like milk, it's only as far as being machshir seeds, being machshir ochel lekabel tumah. Aval linyan bishul basar b'chalav, but when it comes to cooking meat in milk, mechalav einon kechalav, whey is unlike milk. Whey is not considered like milk, and therefore you will be potter for basar b'chalav, like we had said in the previous brisa. And now we transition into kind of scoping out some of the milks really that are chayav for basar b'chalav. And there's going to be a lot of like kavachomas and tzadashavas. It's going to be that kind of stuff really till the end. Honestly, once we get to Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis, things get like a little technical. As I said, I would have liked to make some slides so we can, I think looking would make things helpful here, just because there's like kind of abstract concepts, but we're going to just have to work with our noggins because Shabbos is starting, I think probably in less than 2 hours, and I have to do a lot before then. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Vechalav imo, when the pasuk says vechalav imo, ein li ela vechalav imo, all I know is a kid. A kid, of course. So a kid, when I refer to a kid, I'm going to refer to it as a child goat, and a mother will be the kid's mother. Okay, so bechalav imo, ein li ela bechalav imo. All I know is cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Bechalav par v'rochu minayin. How do I know cooking a kid in the milk of a sheep or in the milk of a cow? Now, obviously, when we looked at the Gemara yesterday on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, we said, well, Gedi includes cows and sheep, and therefore the milk includes cows and sheep. So this would be assuming that Gedi doesn't include cow and sheep, and Gedi actually just means kid, it means goat, okay? So according to this brisa, we don't know cows and sheep. So how do we know cows and sheep? They're included in Chalev Imo. So again, Tana Rabbanan, B'chalev Imo, Ein li elo b'chalev imo. All I know is cooking a kid in its mother's milk is also par v'rochu minayin. How do I know even cooking a kid in cow's milk or sheep's milk is also amrat kavachomer? Well, I'll use my noggin in the following way. Uma imo. Well, if when it comes to a kid and its mother, shelo nesra imo beharba'a, that in terms of mating, I never really thought about this, but I guess it would be permitted for a kid to mate with its mother. I guess goats don't really have like arayos like humans do. And it's the same species. So I guess technically speaking, a kid can mate with its mother. A kid can mate with its mother, and yet ne'esra imo bibishulo, a kid cannot be cooked in its mother. So it's mutter by mating, and yet it's usher when it comes to basar vechalav. Well, para v'rachol shenesra imo be'arba, when it comes to cows and sheep, that a kid would be already when it comes to mating, a kid is forbidden to mate with a cow or with a sheep. It's a different species. Well, then when it comes to enudin shenesra imo bibishulo, so then certainly the kid should also be usher from being cooked in their milk, right? If when it comes to the mother that it's mutter by mating, it's also by basar v'chalav. Cows and sheep that it would be usher when it comes to mating, certainly it should be also usher for basar v'chalav. Now, peculiarly, the Gemara now says Talmud lomer b'chalev imo. That's why it says b'chalev imo, ostensibly to include sheep and cows. V'ha lama likra ha'asilet. I don't understand why we just said Talmud lomer b'chalev imo. I thought we learned it out quite elegantly from a kal v'chomer. So Omer Abashi says Abashi mishum de'ikal lemema, because you could say me'ikara dedina pircha. You could say that the kal v'chomer is flawed. You could say that the kal v'chomer is flawed. Where are we learning out cows and sheep from? From the kid's mother. We're learning out cows and sheep from the kid's mother. Well, when it comes to shchita, you're not allowed to cook, of course, a mother and a kid on the same day. That's also Vesbeno that we learned all about. When was that already? That seems like ages ago. Pei Gimel. That was like over a month ago already. Wow. Akoponim. So when it comes to a kid and its mother, there is an isser inherent in that relationship. You can't shecht them both on the same day. Toma bepara shelo nesra imo b'shchita. When it comes to cows, when it comes to sheep, you can shecht them on the same day. So maybe I'll say, okay, it makes sense that you cannot cook a kid in its mother's milk. You also cannot shecht a kid and its mother on the same day. You can shecht a kid and a cow or a kid and a sheep on the same day. Maybe you can also cook them together. So Tamaloma b'chalev imo. Therefore, we have this b'chalev imo, which comes to include even cows and sheep, and we can't learn it out from the kal v'chomer because it is a bit of a problematic kal v'chomer. I have some tea here, but I didn't add any honey to it. I thought maybe the tea alone could do the trick, but my throat apparently is still not 100%. Like it was getting very schwach the other week, but I managed to fend it off with lots of tea and honey and sucking candies. But it's still not 100%. I still have to be concerned a little bit. Anyways, okay, fine. Tanya Yidach, we learned in another brisa. Okay, so we just already included cows and sheep. Now, Tanya Yidach, Bachalevimo, when the pasuk says again, right? It says 3 times, Bachalevimo. So the next time it says Bachalevimo, Ein li elo Bachalevimo, all I know is cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Bechalev achoso gedola minayin. What does achoso gedola mean? It's a big machlekes. Ultimately, Rashi on Daf Kufidal Amud Beis, right? The Rashis really spill over to Daf Kufidal Amud Beis. Rashi says there that he agrees with the analysis of Reb Yosef Tuve'elim, who is I think often quoted in Tosfos. Now, so what it's talking about, Achoso Agdol, it doesn't literally mean the kid's actual sister. It means a goat that has already been tied. When we learn Masechta Bechoros, the last parak of Masechta Bechoros, we're going to learn about Ma'aser Behema. Now, when it comes to Ma'aser Behema, you take the new animals, whether it's goats, cows, sheep, but you have to tithe them separately. You can tithe goats and sheep together, I believe, but the cows would have to be separate. Anyways, so you take all the goats that have not yet been tied, and you put them in a pen together. You make a small opening in the fence, and you let them out one at a time. And every 10th one, you mark with some red dye, and those are the ones that are marked to be Ma'aser Behema. You offer them as korbanos. Now. So a achosa agdola, it is referring to a goat that has already gone through the Ma'aser Behema selection process and has been part of the 90% that survived the selection. So achosa agdola is a goat that has already been tied, that has already experienced and survived the Ma'aser Behema, the tithe. So now, achosa agdola minayin. So how do I know that it is forbidden to cook a kid in the milk of a tithed goat? That's achosa agdola. I don't know, maybe I'll refer to it as a tithed goat, maybe I'll refer to it as achosa agdola. I'm not sure yet. Just the question is what's less of a mouthful and what's easy to understand. So how do we know that it is forbidden to cook a kid in the milk of achosa agdola? So Omrat Kavachomer, well, we say it's a Kavachomer. Uma imo, or when it comes to his mother, Shenichnesa imo ladir lis aser. That's an interesting concept. That the kid's mother could be tied together with it. How so? Well, apparently goats can already give birth in their first year of life. They could already be having babies. So you could theoretically have a goat which itself has not yet been tied, and yet it already has a kid, and the kid and its mother could theoretically be tied in the same pen. Masha ein kein, the achoso agadola, which has already been tied. And again, it's not literally the kid's sister, because you can't have a situation where the kid's sister was tied and its mother still hasn't been tied there because it's in its first year. Anyways. So where am I? Uma imo, when it comes to the kid's mother, shenichnasa imo ladir lis aser, that can be together, right? The mother can be together with the kid during Ma'aser Behema, ne'esra imo bebishul, and yet is forbidden when it comes to basar vechalav. Achoso shelo nichnasa imo ladir, achoso agadola, that is not going to be tied with it, because it's already been tied. This aser to be tied, eno din shenesra imo bebishul. Certainly then you are also not going to cook the kid in the milk of the achos agdola. You're not even going to tie the kid with the achos agdola, nor will you cook the kid in the milk of the achos agdola. And now once again, peculiarly, the Gemara says, Talmud lomar b'chalev imo, that's why it says b'chalev imo. What do you mean? I thought we learned it out from this Kal V'chomer. V'alam likra, asile, we learned it out in the Kal V'chomer. Why are you saying therefore it says b'chalev imo? So Amar Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi mishum deika lemeimar meikar dedina pircha, because you could say that the Kal V'chomer is faulty. Where is the Kal V'chomer coming from? From the kid's mother. Well, Male'imo shekain nesra imo b'shchita. well, the kid and its mother are not allowed to be shechted on the same day, and you could say, no surprise, that they're also not allowed to be cooked together. Tomar, right, the kid in the mother's milk. Tomar ba'achoso gedola shelo nesra imo b'shchita. Achoso gedola, you are allowed to shech the kid and the achoso gedola on the same day. So maybe you are allowed to cook the kid in the achoso gedola's milk. Talmud lomar b'chalev imo. Therefore, we learn the pasuk says b'chalev imo that comes to include as well. You cannot cook a kid in the achos agdola's milk. Ashkan achos agdola, okay, fine. So you can't cook a kid in achos agdola's milk. Achos oktana minayin. What if we're talking about another fellow goat that has not yet been tied? I imagine I'm probably going to refer to that as achoso akitana. Okay, so achoso agdola is a different sheep, a different goat that has been tied. Achoso aktana is a goat that has not yet been tied. So how do I know that if there's a goat that has also not yet been tied, and that goat produces milk already, it's already pregnant, produces milk, how do I know that you may not cook the kid in achoso akatana's milk? Minayin, how do we know that? Asami benaya, we learn it out through a tzara shava. We learned it out. We kind of use the things that we already know in terms of cooking the kid in the mother's milk, in terms of cooking the kid in the achos agdola's milk. We learned that information to make a conclusion about achos aktana. Mehai teisi, what are we going to bring it from? Teisi me'imo. Well, let's try bringing achos aktana from the kid's mother. Male'imo shekei nesra imo b'shchita. But one second, you can't learn out achos aktana from the kid's mother because there's a stringency there. You can't shecht the kid's mother and the kid on the same day. And we're saying, and you also can't cook the kid in its mother's milk. Achos Agadola tuchiach. Okay, fine. So let's maybe then learn it out from Achos Agadola, where you can shecht the kid and Achos Agadola on the same day, and yet you can't cook the kid in Achos Agdola's milk. So mal Achos Agadola, shonichnusa imo ladir lisasir imo. Okay, but one second. I can understand why achos hagedola is aser, because you're also right. You don't tithe the kid with achos hagedola, and you also don't cook the kid in achos hagedola's milk. However, you do tithe the kid with achos haktana because it has not yet been tithed yet. Imo tochiach. Okay, so then let's learn it out from the kid's mother, because you tied the kid together with its mother. So v'chazor adin, but then we have the issue that you cannot shech the mother and the kid on the same day. Look, we tried to learn out achos haktana from the mother, didn't work. We tried to learn out achos haktana from achos hagedola, also didn't work. But you know what? There is a commonality. There is a common thread between achos hagedola and the mother. Hatzad hashava shaben. What they have in common is shehu. I'm going to switch around some of the words over the next line. Shehu chalav v'asur levashel bo. Both achos hagdola as well as the mother produce milk, and it is forbidden to cook the kid in that milk. Af ani avi achos haktana shehu chalav v'asur levashel bo. Also, when it comes to achos haktana that produces milk, you cannot cook the kid in that milk either. Says the Gemara, Ihachi. The Gemara is so impressed by our ability to deduce the isser of cooking the kid in achos hagatana's milk, that the Gemara said, you know what? We could probably do the same for achos hagadola as well. Ihachi achos hagadola nami tesim b'naya. Let's learn out achos hagadola also in a similar manner. Now, the Gemara does not elaborate, does not spell out what that tzara shava would look like. I'm not going to spell it out either. Just things are complicated enough for with what we already have in the Gemara. Things are going to get a little bit more complicated. So I'm not going to now go into a whole new tzara shava that isn't in the Gemara. However, if anybody's curious, the tzara shava can be found in Rashi and Daf Kuf Yudalad Amud Beis in about a third of the way in, a third of the way down. It says Achoso Gedola Nami. In that Rashi, basically it's a tzad hashava that comes between imo and para. But anyways, the point is, the Gemara says, after we so elegantly learnt out achosa aktana from a tzad hashava between imo and achosa gdola, we could probably do the same thing, learning out achosa gdola from imo and from para. To which the Gemara says, enachinami, yitaka can. El vechalav imo lomali. Well, then what do we need that vechalav imo to teach me? Mibayla lichdetanya, we need vechalav imo for the following brisa. Vechalav imo ein li ela vechalav imo. All I know is that you're not allowed to cook a kid in its mother's milk. Hi atzma bechelba minayin. Okay. How do we know that it's forbidden to cook a kid in its own milk? Now, this discussion, essentially for the rest of the daf, as far as we're going to gets a little bit technical. So, Amad Kavachomer, we say Kavachomer, Uma b'makom shelo ne'esar pri im pri b'shchita, ne'esar pri im ha'em b'shchita. Okay, so the shaila is, what exactly is fruits? And it's a little bit tricky. We think of fruits as like, fruits on a tree. Okay, so what are some possibilities for what fruits can be here when it comes to an animal, when it comes to a goat? Well, offspring could be the fruits of an animal. Also, the milk that an animal produces it produces offspring, it also produces milk. Milk is also the fruits of an animal. So if you think about it, when we're talking about a kid and its mother, the mother produces two things. The mother produces that kid, but the mother also produces milk. So both the kid and the milk that potentially we're cooking the kid in, those are both its fruits. Now again, fruits can also be its offspring. So when it comes to shchita, we're not talking about milk. We're talking about offspring. So when it comes to shchita, so an animal's fruits would be two of its children. So in terms of shchita, you're allowed to shecht both of the children, both of the fruits on the same day. That's fine. So even though the fruits are mutter when it comes to shchita, but to shecht a kid and its mother on the same day, that is asur. So when it comes to shchita, the fruits are mutter, but the fruit together with the mother is asur. That's asur v'ezbino. So therefore, we want to say kavachomer. If by shchita the fruits are mutter, but the fruit and the mother is asur, well then certainly when it comes to basar vechalav, where the fruits are asur, what's the fruits of the mother? Well, one fruit is the kid, the other fruit is the milk it produces. So when it comes to basar vechalav, the fruits are asur. You're not allowed to cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's literally the translation of the pasuk. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, both of which are fruits. So when it comes to basar v'chalav, fruits are asur. Certainly then, the fruit and its mother should be asur as well. What's the fruit and the mother when it comes to... But that's basically, the kid is the mother, and the milk that it produces is the fruits. So basically, cooking a animal in its own milk is basically, the milk is the fruit, and the mother is the animal itself that produced the fruit, that produced the milk. So therefore, we're saying that if when it comes to basar v'chalav, the fruits are asur, cooking a kid in its mother's milk, both of which are fruits of the mother, so the fruits are asur, certainly then the fruit along with its mother, i.e. cooking a kid in its own milk, which is its own fruit, so the fruit being the milk, the mother being the kid itself, so cooking a kid in its own milk certainly then should be asur. Again, if by basar v'chalav the fruits are asur, certainly then the fruit and the mother would be asur. Okay, again, for the rest of the daf, it's going to be a little bit tricky like this, exactly like putting our finger on what exactly is like the fruit and what's the mother, and anyways. So, Amar kavachomer, we say kavachomer, uma b'makom shelo ne'esar pri im pri b'shchita. If when it comes to shchita, the fruits are permitted, you can shecht two offspring on the same day. Ne'esar pri im ha'em, and yet it's asur to shecht the offspring together with the mother. So the fruits are permitted, but the fruit and the mother is asur. b'shchita. Makom shenesar pri bebishul. If when it comes to basar vechalav, that the fruits are asur, cooking a kid in its own mother's milk, which are both fruits. Eino din shenesar pri ima'em bebishul. Certainly, then a fruit with the mother, the fruit being the milk, and the mother being the kid that produced that milk. So cooking a kid in its own milk, essentially, would certainly be asur. Okay, fine. So Talmud Omar bechalav imo, and peculiarly again it says bechalav imo halam likra ha'asile. Why do we need a pasuk? I thought we just learned an elegant kavachomer. So now essentially for the rest of our time together today, we're going to be searching, we're going to be trying to disprove the kavachomer. What was the proof of the kavachomer? Essentially the proof of the kavachomer was that if you have a scenario where the fruits are asur, certainly the fruit will be asur with its mother. If the fruits with each other are asur, certainly the fruit and the mother will be asur. That's essentially our kavachomer. So we're going to be searching for a scenario now where you can have the fruits are asur, and yet the fruit with its mother is permitted. Again, it's kind of abstract, but that's our mission now. So Rav Achdavoy Bar Ami is now going to give us an example of where the fruits are asur, and yet the fruit and the mother are permitted. Here we go. Rav Achdavoy Bar Ami, Mishum de'ika lemeimar, because I can give you the following scenario, sus ben susya. So if you have a female horse, and that female horse mated with a male horse and gave birth to a baby male horse. So if you have a baby male horse whose mother is a horse, achi pirda. However, the mother horse also mated with a donkey, and now the baby male horse also has a sibling who is a mule, a female mule. So those pairs are asur. The baby male horse is not allowed to mate with the baby female mule because it's kalaim, they're different types. So they are asur, and yet the baby male horse would be allowed to mate with its mother because they're both horses. So here we have a situation where the pairs are asur, and yet the fruit and the mother would be permitted. Asur pri and pri, that the offspring are asur with each other, the horse and the mule. Umutter pri ima'em, and yet the pri would be permitted with the mother, the baby horse, and its mother would be permitted to mate together technically. To which the Gemara says, yeah, but that is not a good proof because it's not about really the relationship of fruits to mothers. There's a different influence here, which is Hasam Zera Ha'ab Hu Dikagarim. There, really, the main contributing factor there is the donkey. Meaning it's not inherently about fruit, the relationship of fruit versus fruit and mother is also related to the donkey making a mule with the mother. Let's see. What's the proof? Deha, for example, Hapered ben Susya, for example, what if this mother horse would give birth to would mate with a donkey and give birth to a male mule, achi pirda, and a female mule, yochiach. Right? So for example, if this female horse mated with a donkey and gave birth to two children, both of whom would be mules, right? Because a horse mating with a donkey would make a mule. So you have a male baby mule and a female baby mule. Those pairs are going to be mutter to each other and asur to the mother who is a horse. So Kilu, it's not inherent about the relationship between the fruits and the mother, because here we have a situation where the fruits are actually permitted to each other and they are asur to the mother because the mother is a horse and they are mules. So it's really not about fruits versus mother there. It's really about the impact that the donkey is having on the offspring. Rather says Mar Brei Dravina, Mishum Dikal Memar Ebed ben Shifcha Achi Mishucheres Yochiach. If you have a shifcha, a slave woman, if you have a shifcha, and she has two children, one of them is a boy, one of them is a girl. one of them is an eved, and the other one, the girl, has been freed. So in that case, the children, the children are also to each other, meaning in terms of, in principle, like they're types, right? An eved is not a baschorin, a meshucheres is a Jewish woman. So an eved is not allowed, an eved Kanani is not allowed to marry a Jewish woman. So the offspring are also to each other, but an eved Kanani can marry not his mother, right? Cannot mate with his mother, but with other shifcha Kananioses. So here we see that the children, the pairs, are forbidden to one another. An eved with a mishucheres, that's not allowed, but the pairs and the mother are allowed. An eved with a mishucheres, in principle, is allowed to mate. So Dikal Lememar Eved ben, so where am I? So Amar Mar Breder Avinu Mishum Dikal Lememar, I can give you the scenario. Eved ben Shifcha Achi Mishucheres, a Shifcha Knainis who has two children, one of whom is an Eved and the other one is a Shifcha Mishucheres who's been freed. Yochiach she also pri and pri, that the children are also to each other, umoter pri imaim, and the Eved, the son, is allowed to be with the mother, a shifcha kanainis, not literally a son and a mother, but an eved and a mishucheres. No, an eved and a shifcha. So we see that the pairs are also, but the fruit and the mother is permitted. Hasam get shichrahu de kagarim, and there also it's not really about the fruits to fruits versus fruits to mother thing. It's really about simply the get shichrur, the emancipation document. It really depends who's been freed, right? For example, if the scenario was the following, Eved ben Mishucheres Achri Shifcha, if it's the mother who's been freed, and the children are an Eved and a Shifcha Knainis, respectively, well then, in that scenario, the fruits, the children, would be also to one another, even though they'd be permitted to their mother, not literally to the mother, but the mother's been, they would be permitted to one another. Is that what I said? They'd be permitted to one another, because they're both Avadim, an Eved Knani, a Shifcha Knainis, but they'd be forbidden to their mother, because their mother is freed. So shemuter pri and pri, that the pairs are permitted to each other, v'asar pri imaim. So there it's really not about whether we're talking about fruits or mothers, we're talking about who's simply been freed, who's received an emancipation document. Ella, Amar Avidi bar Avin, relatives of Avidi bar Avin, mishum dikal memar, because you could say, kilei zrayim yochichu, planting wheat together with lentils, for example. She'asar pri and pri, that you're not allowed to plant the wheat and the lentils together. Umuter pri imaim, but you are allowed to plant wheat directly in its mother being the ground. You can plant wheat directly in the ground. You just can't plant wheat with lentils, for example. To which the Gemara says, "Klum nesar pri and pri ela ayidea aim." 1 second. There isn't inherently anything wrong with the wheat and the lentils per se. You could put them together, you could store them together in the same vessel. There's no issue with them being together inherently. The issue is really with the earth. That it's in Ela Amar Ravashi, rather says Ravashi, Mishum Deika Lememar Ma Lepri Impri Shekain Shnei Gufim Tomer Bepri Ma'aim Shekain Guf Echad. Rather, you could say, look, when it comes to the kid and the milk and the mother, etc., and when we're talking about the two pairs, so we're talking about two different animals, right? You have the mother that produces a kid and the mother that produces milk. So we're talking about two different animals. When we're talking about cooking a kid in its own milk, that's different because we're talking about the same animal. So we can't, so therefore they are different, and therefore, Mishumachi, it's the Kra, that is why we need the Pasuk to, right? So we can't just be comparing Paris and Paris versus Paris to mothers, because Paris to Paris are two different bodies, whereas Paris to its mother, i.e., it's the kid in its own milk, is the same body. Therefore, we need the pasuk of vechalav imo to teach us that also cooking a kid in its own milk is going to be also in chevra. We are going to stop there for today. On Daf Kuf Yudalad, on Daf 114 of Masechta Chullin, we learned about Chelev vechalav, cooking and eating. Chelev in Chalav. We saw the opinions of Reb Ami and Reb Asi, one of whom said that you would be chayiv makis. The other one said that you would not be chayiv makis. The question is in what scenario, right? We had said that everyone agrees ein iser chal al iser, and the question is, perhaps we're saying maybe you would or wouldn't be chayiv makis for cooking chelev b'chalav, or maybe you would or wouldn't be chayiv makis for eating chelev b'chalav. There are different ways of looking at that. Maybe we said that they actually agree. One say you would get makis for cooking, the other one says you would not get makis when it comes to eating because of an isser chal al isser. So we explored that sugya of chelev b'chalav. We then got into the kind of scoping out cooking a kid in what kind of milk. We had talked about cooking a kid in cow's milk, sheep's milk, its mother's milk, an already tied goat, a not already tied goat, its own milk. So we learned out all of those situations, lots of kind of kal v'chomers and tzad hashabes and logic. So Cheveh, that was Daf Kuf Yudalad, Daf 114 of Masechta Chullin. Catch you tomorrow. Have a great day. Cheers.